I don't think I'm on. There we go.
There we go.
Good evening. Welcome to the August 14th, 2023 regularly scheduled work session. Tonight, there are 3 items on the agenda. Public comment is allowed that is germane to an agenda item. If you wish to speak, you are required to fill out a public comment card. And if you're speaking on behalf of an organization, you must fill out an affidavit that you have the authority of said organization. Please remember, this is not a time to engage the mayor or members of the city council in conversation. When your name is called, please come forward and speak into the microphone, stating your name and address for the record. Public comment will be allowed for a total of 10 minutes per agenda item and no more than 2 minutes per person. Once the item is called, no other public comment cards will be accepted. Will the city clerk please sound agenda item A?
Mayor, that agenda item is the presentation of the draft capital improvement element known as the CIE 2023 annual update. Mr. Bob Buscemi.
Hi, good evening. I'm Paige Hatley. I'm part of the Ross and Associates team that provides assistance to the city on an as-needed basis on all things related to impact fees. That includes coming before you each year on a mandated requirement that's put to us by DCA for all communities that collect impact fees. Let's see. And I just have a very brief presentation to describe the item. If you recall, of course, there is what's on the books, what's called a capital improvements element, or CIE, that was first adopted in 2015 by the city when the city adopted an impact fee program. The CIE document is technically part of your comprehensive plan and is required of all communities that collect impact fees. It's basically the master list of all projects that are eligible for impact fee funding. Specifically for Milton, that's in the categories of roads, parks, fire, and police. The CIE is also required to include not just a long-range list of projects, but a short-term list, a 5-year community work program of impact fee projects anticipated to be implemented. Once the community adopts the CIE and begins collecting impact fees, the state says that we have to maintain an impact fee program by submitting what's called an annual update report. And for the city of Milton, your a required deadline or adoption deadline each year is Halloween. 2 main components of an annual update. The first is a financial report, as shown by the graphic here for the previous fiscal year, showing in each of the public facility categories, fire, parks, law, and roads, what was collected, what was spent, and what's the balance at the end of the fiscal year. The annual update also includes more detailed tables for each of these categories, showing specifically what projects impact fees were spent on. The second main component is an update to that 5-year work program. So we just slide forward the project listings from 2024 to 2028 for this year. The projects do have to come from that master list in your 2015 adopted CIE. But the annual update provides an opportunity to change implementation years and cost estimates because, of course, those are prone to change and perhaps annually. You also have just want to note, a community work program in your comp plan that has a different list of projects. We don't tinker with that, but we do update the CWP with just the impact fee specific projects each year. So looking ahead to next week, then, the process as mandated by DCA is to have a public hearing that's slated for next Monday that then authorizes council to consider transmitting the draft for review. At the end of their review period and approval by DCA, we're looking to come back to you in mid-October in advance of the deadline for adoption. Then that will allow DCA to extend your QLG status for another year. So thank you for for humoring me. I know we repeat the same content each year, but it's an important part of maintaining an impact fee program, and just wanted to offer that as a reminder, and happy to take any questions.
Any questions from council? Thank you for the update. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
Okay, I'm assuming, is there any public comment?
There is none, sir.
Okay, so will the city clerk please sound agenda item B?
B is discussion of intersection concepts for Cox Road. Mr. Rob Del Ross.
Good evening, Mayor, Council members. Tonight, we have an item giving you an update on our Cox Road project. We were before you about 3 months ago, giving you the various concepts. They were looking at the intersections, and tonight we'll be recapping what's been happening in these past 3 months, notably the summary of the public outreach we've done since May. I'm going to give you a quick project history and location, just make sure everyone remembers which intersections we're talking about, summary of the public outreach, staff recommendations, and next steps. What are we talking about tonight? The map below, 3 red circles are the 3 intersections that are part of our project. Cox Road at the far southwest corner of the city. 2 of the intersections are shared with Roswell and an IGA. Roswell is responsible for 25% of the total costs. If you can see my cursor, Cox and King, with Roswell owning 1/4 of the intersection. Cox and Idris Ebenezer with us sharing with Roswell 50/50. And then the Cox Road at State Route 140, Arnold Mill, which is 100% Milton. We've had a lot of public outreach over the past 3 months. I've met personally with property owners at the Porter Academy and the Georgia Golf Center. We ran a survey with a social pinpoint site at the end of May and had 114 survey responses. We had a public outreach event in person at drop-off in the morning with parents from the Porter Academy. And we also had a public meeting on a Saturday all day long at the Legacy Park, talking to customers and attendees of the park's activities. The complete summary of all the public outreach is in your packets, but in the presentation, I wanted to highlight a couple of the highlights. Question 4 at the bottom of the screen. Of our 114 survey responses, we received over 75 that live near the project area and frequently travel throughout this corridor. What is the highest priority for you within the survey area? We asked responsees to rank 1 to 4. The top 2 priorities being reducing congestion, delay, and improving safety. Priority number 3, managing access, and priority 4, bicycle and pedestrian accommodations. Next question, at the intersection of Cox and King and Cox and Idris, which of the concepts would you prefer? Alternative 1, a roundabout, was far greater than alternative 2, the traditional signal with turn lane improvements. The second question, at the intersection of Cox Road and 140 Arnold Mill, which of the 2 alternatives did you prefer? The strong preference from the public was for the green T option. I'll show you what that is to refresh your memories here in a second. About 75 to 25 over the signal improvements with additional turn lanes. Before I show you the graphics of the concepts, here's a brief summary of staff recommendations and where we'd like to go from here. We're recommending a roundabout at Cox and King, estimated total cost of $2.5 million, impacting parcels in both cities. At Cox and Idris and Ebenezer, we're also recommending a roundabout, estimated total cost of $3 million, with impacts in both cities. For Cox at 140 and Arnold Mill, that's the most complicated project, higher price tag, $4 million. We're not recommending moving forward with that tonight into preliminary design. Sarah and I would like a couple of months to work through our resources with GDOT and see if we're able to cost share and split that project up so we aren't bearing 100% of those costs. So that'll probably come back before you, maybe by the end of the year, beginning of next year, but no further progress tonight. We've identified several short-term opportunities that we can discuss later if you'd like, improvements that we've already put in the field and improvements that we're going to be moving forward with shortly after this meeting. All 3 intersections are going to be advanced independently. One of the most common questions we've gotten from residents are you planning to tear up all these intersections at once, or are you planning to do one, then do the next, and then do the next? Quite simply, I could argue either way for what's less impactful to the residents. I think ideally we would be doing them all at once. Ideally, we'd be under construction in 25, 26 on the 2 roundabouts. Obviously, we wouldn't be closing lanes and closing legs to trap driveways, but I do think there would be a big enough scope combined for those 2 intersections that if we're able to push both through the design and right-of-way process, we could potentially get one contractor on both intersections and ultimately save the city money. Here's our concept for Cox and King. This is probably the simplest of the three projects. This is a pretty standard, at this point, standard one-lane roundabout. You'll see the pink lines. We're going to be working with one of the property owners on the northwest corner to potentially relocate their driveway further away from the roundabout so they're able to more safely operate, making lefts in and lefts out. There's a significant right-of-way purchase on the southeast corner, but his house is so far away, we didn't think that was going to be a major issue. The second intersection, showing you the concept of Idris and Ebenezer. The first thing you'll probably notice if you look at Cox and King and look at Idris Ebenezer, we're actually doing an oval for the roundabout, not a true circle. This is a very unique intersection. If you can see at the angles that all four roads are intersecting with Cox Road, given the strange geometrics, given the Georgia Golf Center on the north quadrant and their short range area for chipping and putting. I'm going to take my cursor here and kind of circle that area. We are doing our best to minimize impacts to them as best we can, and an oval actually helps us do that versus a true circle. We are trying to obviously operate a safe intersection and a well-operating and functional roundabout while still trying to minimize business impacts to that property owner. The concept is shown is worst case. We expect to be able to further minimize as we get into preliminary design and have a true survey with topography and are able to reduce those impacts even further. Other elements of the concept, one of the common public outreach requests we received originally, this sidewalk was going to end right about where my cursor was, going west on Ebenezer. There is an existing sidewalk that's ending right about at the end of the page. So there was a request to construct that gap included as part of our project. We're recommending doing that. It's a relatively flat shoulder with just impacting 3 driveways shown in pink. The third intersection is a little bit more complicated, and I'm going to go out of PowerPoint here and zoom in a little bit better so you can see. Okay. So what do we mean by a continuous green T? A continuous green T is very similar to the old intersection we had at 372 in Green that was removed a couple of years ago by GDOT. It was a pilot that they tried to do with an existing pavement, but ultimately they removed when they resurfaced, and we'll hopefully be getting a traffic signal there soon. A continuous green T means that this lane flowing north, if you can see that orange median, the outside lane flowing north never stops. It is a green ball. 24/7, 365. It's free flow operations as long as there's no congestion moving further into Cherokee. That lane never stops for turning vehicles. So we're able to do that by introducing a little bit of this striped area along with a median where my cursor is. This will provide a separation for the left turning vehicles for left turns onto Cox, as well as the left turning, ultimately going northbound. The left turners going off of Cox make this left turn and then end up merging in with the northbound vehicles closer off the screen. Other elements of this concept, I'm going to zoom in even more. We're recommending a median in front of the Legacy Park access. This was a very common, hotly debated topic in public outreach with the safety concerns there at the driveway. We are looking at some short-term measures to prohibit lefts in and lefts out relatively quickly in the next couple of weeks to a month. But the project itself will be constructing a median in front of the Legacy Park to enhance that, to enforce and to encourage that operation. The Porter Academy, is also an unsafe intersection. We heard from many parents, the school operators, that they're very concerned about the number of accidents that they've had at the driveway. Short-term measure that we're considering is a don't block the box measure in front of the driveway. The project itself will allow lefts in to continue, but it will be building a median to prevent the lefts out. We talked about interparcel access with the Porter Academy. Most of you know that we have a existing interparcel access just off the page here that works well both for the city and for the owners of the Porter Academy. They're very happy with the way it's currently operating. They see it as a win-win both for them and the city, and would prefer to leave it as is. So that will stay. For attendees of the park that are coming from, let's say, the north, that are still wanting to access the park, instead of making this right into the driveway here, they would be forced to make the left into Porter Academy and use the interparcel access. Leaving, if they want to make a right and go south, they'd make the right this right here. But if they want to make a left, they would likely use the interparcel access, exit out this driveway, and make the left turn back onto 140. Other routes that work with this improvement, if we are able to build the roundabout at Idris and Ebenezer, that will provide another access point for vehicles. If they don't want to turn left into the Porter Academy, coming from the north, they can go down to Idris Ebenezer, use the roundabout to make a U-turn, and come back heading eastbound to access either of these driveways. Those of you who are familiar with the area, another option based on where your familiarity with the area and where Waze is sending you, Cagle Road is just to the south of Cox. So there are options for, depending on from what direction you're coming from, accessing Cagle and coming around to Idris, and accessing Cox from the west heading east. Next steps, we're here for input and guidance from you tonight. We are moving forward with short-term improvements like I've spoken about. Funding and project identification with GDOT. We are recommending to not immediately move forward with Arnold Mill and 140. We'd like a couple of months to try and craft a project sharing, a split project, some kind of involvement with the state DOT from a funding perspective. So we'll be giving you updates on that in the future. We would like to start working on a modification to Ponding Company's contract. Arwen Lopez is here with me tonight to answer any expert questions that you might have for me. We would like to move forward with preliminary engineering and construction documents for the two recommended roundabouts, Cox Road at Idris Ebenezer and Cox Road at King. Per the IGA, both of those projects are impacting parcels in both cities, so the right-of-way acquisition would be handled by each respective city. We would have a contract, and Roswell has in-house staff. Tentative schedule, if all goes well, we'd be under construction on both roundabouts. Let's hope in 25, if not 26. And that concludes my presentation. Open for any questions you might have.
Any questions for Rob? Paul?
Rob, on the two cost estimates for the non-Arnold Mill, one was, I think, 3 million, the other one was 5 million. Was that the total, or was that the total for just Milton? You said they're like 25% involvement from Roswell on both of those.
Those numbers are total, not Milton's share.
Not
So
Milton's
the
share.
estimated total for the both roundabouts is about 5.5 million, with Roswell putting in $1 million and us putting in 4.5.
Okay. And so, and just hearing your forecast about the timeline to get to those two roundabouts being 25, 26, with the suggested delay for the purposes of saving money with Arnold Mill, what do you think that will do to the timeline if those two are that far out already?
Time is our enemy. As
Yeah.
far as cost goes, every year, every
Yeah.
month goes by, construction prices aren't going down. Atlanta continues to be an area where people continue to move, and we continue to have construction everywhere. So yes, it's important that if we want to move forward with those intersections, we get them designed, we get them acquired, we get them built as quickly as we possibly can.
I'm not sure you understood my question. So you're proposing a chance to work in addition with additional time with GDOT.
Mhm.
And that additional couple of months will put us on whatever timeline. If without GDOT on the other two roundabout projects, we're looking at 25, 26.
Mhm.
With the additional time to work with GDOT, what do you think the timeline is for Arnold Mill?
It's a little tougher to say.
The reason I ask the question is if it's delay for the sake of saving money, but cost goes up, is the saving going to be proportionate enough or significant enough for us to delay?
Sarah and I are both wanting to move forward with Cox and 140 as aggressively as we possibly
Right, I
can.
get
Not
that.
to the point where we're waiting 6 months to a year
Right.
and not coming with any GDOT funding. I could be overly optimistic, but I think there's a chance if we want to hand over 140 and Arnold Bill and ask GDOT to do it, the entire thing 100%, that may be an option for us, but we wouldn't necessarily get it as quick. If they pay for it, we could be 4 to 5 years out instead of a quicker project that we.
Yeah, that's a shame.
Be
'Cause that's
cost-sharing.
an intersection that is way overdue to get some attention.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Yep.
Any other council questions? I appreciate it, Rob.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any public comment?
There are none,
Okay.
sir.
Will the city clerk please sound agenda item C?
C is discussion of the fiscal year 2024 budget. Deputy City Manager, Ms. Bernadette Harville.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. We're here this evening to discuss the proposed budget for fiscal year 2024, which will cover revenue, collections, and spending from October 1st, 2023 to September 30th, 2024. Before we go into the presentation, I would like to review the key dates that remain in the fiscal year 2024 budget cycle and some financial metrics for Milton and our nearby cities as guided by our city strategic plan. Tonight, we are here to go over the proposed budget in detail, answer any questions, and hear feedback from council. This workshop also allows council to see the proposed budget prior to voting on the millage rate that will fund the plan. We held our first of 3 public hearings on the millage rate last Monday, August 7th, and we will have our second hearing this evening. And next Monday, August 21st, will be the third and final hearing, as well as the vote to adopt the 2023 tax year millage rate, which will fund fiscal year 2024 activity. On September 6th, we will hold a public hearing that will allow for stakeholder input on the budget. September 11th is available should another workshop be necessary. And finally, on September 18th, we will hold the final public hearing and council will vote to adopt the budget for fiscal year 2024. As we embarked on this year's budget process, we updated our comparable metrics data, which addresses an objective from the city's strategic plan. Under strategic priority number 1, ensure Milton's sustainability and resiliency, goal number 1 includes an objective to establish a financial metrics comparison relative to similar municipalities. A few summers ago, one of our summer interns, Chloe Richardson, and I spent a few weeks going through demographics, budget documents, and audited financial reports to identify comparable municipalities and collect financial data to benchmark Milton's revenue collections and spending against these communities. We identified several cities outside of North Fulton, but as we began to collect data, we quickly recognized that there were many obstacles to creating an apples-to-apples comparison. Some communities do not have a local option sales tax, while others have substantial community improvement districts or have relationships with their counties to provide fire or recreation services. In the end, for this phase of the project, we chose to focus on those cities we know about most and could ensure the most confidence in our comparative data, which are our nearby cities of Alpharetta, Roswell, Johns Creek, and Sandy Springs. Here you can see graphs representing audited financial data from fiscal year 2018 to fiscal year 2022, allowing for a standardized look at each city's average revenues, expenditures, and debt. The first chart shows the average per capita revenues, excluding other financing sources such as revenues from interfund transfers in and proceeds from the sale of assets like vehicles and equipment. We have updated the population figures to represent those reported by each jurisdiction in their fiscal year 2022 ACFR. For per capita calculations, and although Milton is similar in size geographically to Roswell and Sandy Springs, and about 1.25 times larger than Johns Creek and 1.5 times larger than Alpharetta, Milton has about 40 to 60% fewer residents than many of these cities, or than each of these cities. I say that to explain that if Milton were to have a higher density, the blue bar representing our city would get smaller in these per capita comparisons. The second chart shows the average revenue collections. You can see Milton around 33 million, Alpharetta nearing 71 million, Roswell just over 81 million, Johns Creek around 65 million, and Sandy Springs approaching $110 million over this 5-year average time period. This shows us that although Alpharetta physically collects fewer revenues than Sandy Springs, they lead in per capita collections as their population is approximately 40% less than that of Sandy Springs. At the bottom of the page, we have the average maintenance and operating tax levy over the past 5 tax years for each city. You can see with a tax base makeup at these other cities, even with a lower millage rate, Johns Creek average tax levy is about $4.9 million more than Milton's. And currently we have the second lowest millage rate on average over those 5 years comparative to these cities. On this page, you can see the pattern for average expenditures per capita, actual spending, and how that spending is distributed across functions. Again, even with Milton's lower density, our spending is one of the lowest per capita in North Fulton. And when looking at actual dollars, it is the lowest. The final chart on this page shows that all cities are fairly in line with how they spend money across the functions, with public safety representing an average of 49% of spending, followed by general administration around 20%. This excludes debt service and interfund transfers out. Things start to differ a little bit when you get to the third tier, with public works representing the third largest spending category for Milton, Johns Creek, and Sandy Springs, and culture and recreation takes the third rank in Alpharetta and Roswell. The final category we looked at was debt. These charts represent each city's current debt, including general obligation bonds, revenue bonds, capital leases, notes payable, certificates of participation, and more. Milton's per capita debt is higher than Roswell and Johns Creek. And again, if we had a more dense population, that bar would be smaller. When looking at actual debt for governmental activities, Milton has the second lowest outstanding debt for governmental activities. Roswell also carries some additional debt for other business-related activities that's not considered in this table. Benchmarking just helps give us an idea and an understanding of trends in local government and where we stand as a deliverer of services and the value of our taxpayer dollars. So just wanted to go over that really quickly as we go into talking about how we're going to spend our funds for fiscal year 2024. Does anyone have any questions about those metrics? Okay. So with that in mind, we'll begin the overview of the fiscal year 2024 proposed budget. This budget proposal takes into consideration all of the feedback staff has received from council throughout our newly implemented feedback sessions that began back in April. While this is a draft, barring direction from council, there are no planned material changes between these figures and what will be presented in September's public hearing. But as always, if anything changes, we will point out very clearly those changes as they occur. Before you is the general fund budget summary. You can see that year over year revenue anticipations are projected to increase by 4%, excluding other financing sources. Please note that revenue projections for real, personal, and motor vehicle property taxes are based on a 4.395 millage rate in this document. We went over that last Monday in the 3 options we had: the current millage rate, the one that corresponded most closely to this budget, as well as the rollback rate. So this is that middle one. When taking other financing sources into consideration, an overall 1.6% increase is forecasted to revenues year over year. The decrease in other financing sources is a result of the recognition of revenues received for ARPA-eligible salary expenditures in FY24. Funds freed up by that transfer will primarily go towards an operating transfer out to the capital projects funds to purchase the stock engine that was requested by the fire department back in July. We will go over the more significant revenue variances in a moment, but first we will look at the projections for expenditures in the summary. These figures included in the recommended salary adjustments that are tied to the employment cost index in the amount of 4.7%, and there has been no increase to anticipated health insurance costs based on current experience and funding available in this projection. We will break down the year-over-year variances by department through each individual department in just a moment, but on this page, I'd like to point out that the increase from fiscal year 2023 to fiscal year 2024 for continuing operations is 3.7%. When you include the new initiative requests and the required 1% contingency, the expenditure variance year over year is 7.9%. In the other financing uses section, you can see a decrease of approximately $4.8 million as fund balance beyond required reserves and revenues received in excess of anticipations in fiscal year 2023 have been projected to be transferred to the Capital Projects Fund to fund the city's pay-as-you-go projects, excuse me, in the capital improvement plan. As a reminder, those transfers included $3.4 million for the planning, construction, and outfitting of Fire Station 45, $951,330 for a new fire apparatus, $752,131 for the planning and construction of a new indoor community center. A location for this facility has not yet been determined, but we are setting aside funds for when it is, as well as the transfer of revenues earned from recent vehicle sales that will go back to the specific department's vehicle replacement account. Again, these one-time transfers will not recur in fiscal year 2024, resulting in the decrease seen there. In the end, revenues are actually expected to exceed expenditures in the amount of $227,744, which will go towards the required funding of the 25% reserves needed for fiscal year 2024. Does anyone have any questions about the summary before we move on? Okay. So here we have the actual revenue projections for the actuals that occurred in fiscal year 2021 and 2022, as well as the amended budget projections for fiscal year 2023, which includes amendments that will come before council in September. And we have the proposed 2024 budget. Again, the variances represent a comparison of the 2024 proposed budget to the 2023 amended budget. The first line, real property taxes current year, represents the city's primary revenue source and is anticipated to increase by 8.4%. The major contributor to this variance was the required amendment to reduce anticipated revenues in fiscal year 2023 due to the city's floating exemption. In other words, we had to reduce revenues by $723,456 in fiscal year 2023, and we're projecting to get back in line using updated figures from Fulton County in 2024. Ad valorem taxes, or the tax you pay when you purchase a vehicle, are showing a slight decrease in anticipated changes in the vehicle market related to pricing and purchases. Local option sales tax projections have been based on current activity, historic growth in that category, as well as the city's increased share of revenues as negotiated last December, projecting a 5% increase in fiscal year 2024. Community development provided revenue projection updates taking proposed development into consideration, which has forecasted a decrease in land disturbance of $144,875, but an increase to building permits in the amount of $200,133. We have also contemplated in this forecast an increase of $350,000 in interest earnings as the city continues to recognize higher than anticipated interest revenues on investment of idle funds. You can see that right here. And finally, we have the transfer in from the ARPA fund. This is the recognition of those ARPA eligible expenses in fiscal year 23 that won't recur in 24, leaving us there with a year-over-year increase of that 1.6%. Does anyone have any questions about revenues, specific revenue line items? Okay. Moving on to the individual departments. The variance in the mayor and council department is related to House Bill 704, which was passed by the state and signed into law by the governor earlier this year. In the city clerk's office, you will see a decrease in benefits that is a result of the city's annual true-up process in fiscal year 23. Every year, the city allocates an average amount of funds per employee for benefits across departments and trues up the funds based on actuals at year end. You will also see a decrease in the maintenance contracts category that is related to a contractual change with the city's codification service provider to a flat rate as opposed to a per-page fee we were paying in years past. The increase to salaries and wages in the city manager's office accounts for full year salary changes in fiscal year 2024 that were approved in fiscal year 2023. The increase in professional fees is related to the biannual National Citizen Survey that will occur in 2024. In the 5-year plan, you will see this as a decrease in 25, then an increase again in 26, and so on. The Elections Department was established in fiscal year 2023 when council authorized the city to run its own municipal elections. Previously, election expenses were accounted for in the city clerk's department. And for reference, the last election in fiscal year 2022 was approximately $155,000. The costs for fiscal year 2023 to 2028 have recently been updated and may differ from previous iterations of this forecast, but these are the final projections for those costs. In the general administration, professional fees in 23 included one-time setup costs associated with the city's new online policy manual and will not recur in fiscal year 2024. You will also see anticipated decreases in general supplies as the city looks to a managed print service option. You will see some related increases in the Information Services Department in a moment related to this project. In finance, the increase seen in the maintenance contracts category is in anticipation of costs related to an upgraded ERP for the city or financial software. We will talk about this in a little more detail when we get to the 7-year capital improvement plan, but finance is exploring updated software options that will give the city greater functionality. Legal is anticipating a decrease of costs as fees related to legal in fiscal year 23 were higher than anticipated. If costs continue at the current rate, staff will bring forth an amendment request in fiscal year 2024, but the anticipation is that costs will be closer to $460,000 next year. Salaries and benefits for information services include a full year of funding based on the hiring offer for the new IS director position. The communications category is also showing a substantial increase as the city moves to consolidate all phone lines and internet service fees under information services. Related decreases will be seen in this category across general government buildings, municipal court, police, fire, and parks and recreation as this process is implemented to move everything under information services. You'll see an increase in maintenance contracts that includes enhanced GIS services and an increase in machinery and equipment that accounts for the move to the managed print service provider. In human resources in fiscal year 2023, the city utilized contract services to help fill a vacancy in the 2-person department, as well as transition the roles to the new staff as they were hired on. These expenses were covered by salary savings that have resulted in what appears to be an increase in salaries and wages as the accounts are set back to a full year of funding for both staff positions. There's also been a forecasted increase to professional fees in the department as they go out to bid for a new human resources information system platform, which will include enhanced applications such as recruitment and performance management. Additionally, a full year of funding has been budgeted for costs associated with the city's fiduciary investment advisor, which was previously being covered by forfeited funds in the investment plan, which have now been spent, and we are budgeting for that directly to the Human Resources Department. In risk management, our insurance provider quoted a slight increase to our cyber coverage in fiscal year 2023. We have added funding for that in future years, as well as additional coverage needs as we take on other buildings, and are forecasting a 4.8% increase year over year. General government buildings is recognizing a reduction based on expenses in fiscal year 2023 that will not recur in 24, including the pressure washing and painting of City Hall, as well as some accessibility improvements to the building. You will also see a decrease to communications that we discussed earlier as we transfer those phone lines and internet lines to the Information Services Department. Again, general government buildings cover City Hall, the Thomas S. Byrd House, and the Public Works Maintenance Building at this time. The increase in the communications department is related to the market adjustment to salaries that we have been discussing, as well as a full year of funding for the new communications coordinator position at the hiring offer rate. Maintenance contracts have increased as communications will be rolling out a citywide text communication platform that will be an expanded version of the Code Red system currently in place and will allow for customizable communications for both emergency and non-emergency matters. There is a corresponding decrease in fire that relates to the removal of funding for Code Red as the program has moved into communications. Community outreach and engagement has been merged with Parks and Recreation and will no longer carry an independent department budget. This page will go away in 2 years once there is no data associated with any of the years we're comparing in the budget book. The variance in salaries and wages in the municipal court is a result of the way Milton budgets for sessions requiring a judge. If a substitute judge is required, the cost is covered by salary savings that did not go towards paying our appointed judge. This results in what appears to be an increase in salaries and wages, but is actually offset by a decrease in professional fees where substitute judges were paid out of and won't be budgeted for again fiscal year '24. The professional fees decrease has been slightly offset by the increase in the IGA with the city of Alpharetta. Milton and Alpharetta share a court clerk and solicitor through this agreement, with a 40% of those salaries and benefits being the responsibility of Milton, which have been increased due to the annual salary increases that were approved through the Alpharetta budget. In police, the increase to employee benefits are the result of a return to the average benefit cost per employee versus last year's true-up amendments, as well as the release of funding from this category in fiscal year '23 to cover higher than anticipated costs in the body-worn and in-car camera and uniform costs due to turnover and replacements of employees. The communications line is down as we move those costs to information services. Maintenance contracts are up due to the city's share in the North Fulton Regional Radio System Authority, as well as the move from OSSI to Hexagon as the city of Alpharetta transitions to a new contract for record management and CAD, which Milton also shares in. These are new updates compared to the last version of this that you had, so I just wanted to point that out as we go along. And these updated contractual costs are due to the version of this budgeted forecast in OSSI was around $50,000, and this is closer to about $120,000 annually for those costs. We will also see this included in one-time licensing fees and setup costs when we get to the 7-year PAYGO program. You'll see a decrease in machinery and equipment associated with the decision to budget for computer hardware refresh as a capital expenditure that we will discuss in more detail later this evening, as well as decreases to supplies and uniforms related to those 23 expenses that are not anticipated to recur in '24.
Bernadette,
Yes,
can you just go back one slide, please?
absolutely.
Can you just tell us a little bit more about the maintenance contracts?
Yes. So annually, the city has their share in the North Fulton Regional Radio System Authority, and that authority is now looking towards long-term capital planning as well. So all of the participants in that program have agreed to an increased share cost as they look to make sure there's funding available to replace capital items as we move into the future. So that was one of the major increases there. And the second one is Alpharetta has a new records management system coming on board, and we share in that. I have representatives from police department if we need to go into more detail. But as we looked at that, they negotiated a cost specific to Milton to make sure our share represented our usage. And in that, the annual cost will increase over what we were paying for OSSI, the previous provider.
And those two items account for how much of that $671,000?
I can get you that exact dollar amount. I just don't have it right here.
Ballpark. I mean, is
Oh,
it?
I'd hate to make a guess. It is the majority of it because we did go through line by line. It is the majority of it. As I mentioned, I believe OSSI was around 55, and now we're looking at 120 something thousand just for that one piece. But I don't remember last year's North Fulton Regional Radio System Authority number to give you a comparison, but I can get that for you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. In our break, I'll get that and I'll bring it back up. So moving on to the fire department, fire has an overall decrease, which takes into consideration the transfer of those phone lines and internet service fees over to information services, as well as the removal of Code Red. They did incur the additional costs also for North Fulton Regional Radio System Authority and their maintenance contracts line, so you see a slight increase there. They also have decreases showing in uniforms as the department has looked for a way to, they had some delayed deliveries in '22 that increased costs in '23 that won't recur. And they're also looking at a standard cost per employee over time as the new person in that position is looking to save expenses. Also having one-time costs related to the outfitting of Fire Station 42 that will not recur in '24, showing a decrease to furniture and fixtures and machinery and equipment. In Public Works, in fiscal year 2024, 100% of the salaries and wages for the city's development engineer will be budgeted for in the Community Development Department. In years past, this was split 70-30 between Community Development and Public Works. You will also see a decrease in machinery and equipment associated with the anticipated expenses in '23 for a new variable message board and traffic counters that will not recur in fiscal year 2024, showing that decrease there. In Parks and Recreation, we have recognized increases in salaries and wages due to the hiring offers for new positions, as well as a requested increase to starting pay for camp counselors in the amount of $2 per hour as we compete with other camps and nearby businesses to recruit staff. There is an increase in facilities repair and maintenance associated with fiscal year 2024 projects to include resurfacing the pool deck at the Milton City Park and Preserve and painting buildings at Bell Memorial Park. Staff is also recognizing increases to rental costs for basketball courts as the program grows and increases to general supplies as prices continue to increase for materials for the parks. Under passive parks, the increase in lawn care is related to the mowing schedule at Freemanville and Birmingham property, and there is a noted decrease in the grounds repair related to the demolition costs at Milton City Park and Preserve that occurred in '23 and will not recur in '24. In community development, salaries and wages include the requested market adjustment to salaries of 4.7%, that 100% funding for the development engineer, which was previously split 70-30 with Public Works, as well as a return to 100% staffing in-house. This can be seen by the decrease to professional fees. In fiscal year 2023, salary savings were transferred out of salaries down to the professional fees to cover vacated positions. Staffing is now, I think they're one short in community development at this point, so looking towards in 2024 having full staffing. The increase in maintenance contracts is related to the software support setup and training and annual inflationary increases to the city's permit tracking software. The decrease in machinery and equipment is related to the decision to fund hardware refresh out of the capital projects fund, which we'll talk about in just a moment. And finally, we have economic development under the same situation as community outreach and engagement. Economic development has been merged in with community development and will no longer carry an independent budget.
Bernadette,
Yes, sir.
excuse me.
No, absolutely.
You-
Did I go too fast?
Excuse me, well, you do go fast, I'll tell you that.
I'm on speed 1.2.
Fire and general fund expenditures,
Yes.
under facility repair and maintenance, that number seems to bounce a lot. 22, it was 171,000, and then
Yes.
only 600 last year, and now we're predicting 17,000.
I can explain what was going on in fiscal year 2022, which is this $171,000. We had the mold remediation project that occurred there at Station 41, and the cost for that minus the capital expense for the new HVAC system was all booked here.
Okay,
And so in '22, it appears that primarily, sometimes some of the equipment at the station, the door might be considered a piece of equipment as opposed to the facility, might have been booked in, as you can see, the equipment repair and maintenance item. So those two together, I would average together.
so we're assuming that it's approximately about $15,000 a year just in facility maintenance, et cetera? Is that,
Correct.
Okay.
And then Chief's team is looking at what parts of the building they're considering parts of equipment as opposed to the actual facility. That's like we were mentioning, sometimes in years past, doors may have been at one point considered part of the facility, and then one point considered a piece of equipment. So they're working through ironing out exactly how they're counting those types of features of the building.
okay, thanks.
Absolutely. So going back to our other financing uses. This includes the detailed layout of the year-over-year transfers that cover the city's PAYGO program, debt service owed on the revenue bond, and funding to support anticipated expenses exceeding the annual hotel motel tax collected to pay for city events. So as you can see, primarily we are having a decrease. Every year we kind of project what we need to be able to fund the PAYGO program. And then when we come back in and look at actuals for the prior fiscal year, we see if we have any additional available funds, and at that time we will expense them towards these projects. So that line item may change between now and the end of that fiscal year. Does anyone have any questions? I'll stop here about the general fund. I know we're moving a little bit at light speed, but we have heard the majority of this in different iterations over the last few months.
In looking at the fire, again,
Mm-hmm.
the uniforms,
Yes.
we had 258,000 this past year. I'm sure there's a reason for that, but I don't recall it.
Yes, no problem. I will go back over that. We had some delivery delays in fiscal year 2022 that led to needing to rebudget and when we received the equipment in 23. So even if we order something in this fiscal year, if there are delivery delays and we receive it in next fiscal year, we have to account for the expense in that year. So the team ordered everything in due time, and due to the production line delays we were seeing, they did not receive a lot of it until the beginning of the next fiscal year. So they had to account for almost a year and a half's worth of uniforms in 23.
And in '24, we're still double what we were doing in other years. Why is that? Is it just the growing number of individuals?
I can bring the chief up here, or I can take a look into that, but I don't have that exact answer.
He can-
So that's combined, so costs have gone significantly as far as uniforms and personal protective equipment. We've seen costs double. So I asked the person that's in charge of sports services to look at having designated amount per firefighter. I think we looked at 500 a year. Is that what they get for uniforms? That's what you get, instead of sort of being like a shop is open and you can just order what you want. So you get 500 per year for uniforms, and then you get 160 some dollars for a uniform boot a year.
In that category, does uniforms cover like all
Everything.
the additional protective gear type of stuff?
I think here it's included in
Turnout
this.
gear is
Yes, turnout gear is, so turnout gear has increased. So just to give you an idea, to equip a firefighter, helmet, boots, turnout gear, gloves, what's required, we're looking at $5,500. It used to be about $35, but it's just increased costs like everything else. Inflation, and then the other thing that Bernadette mentioned is we can't get stuff. That's the issue. There was an issue of COVID supply, so now they're trying to get caught up, but they're charging more for equipment.
And we do also have the cost for that second set
Yes.
of boots, helmets, and masks that were approved for the ladder tender concept
Is in here.
in 23. And we had recognized that masks were previously being accounted for in a different line item that we've now moved into uniforms. They were being
each-
considered some piece of equipment.
And each firefighter gets 2 sets of gear, because if, like today, we had a structure fire, that's where I came from. So for cancer prevention and obviously health and readiness, they have to, when we get back to the station, they wash that gear, but at the same time, they grab their second gear so they're ready to respond. So we equip them, and that's best practices. That's what NFPA recommends, and also as part of the cancer prevention.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you, Chief. All right. So moving on to those new initiatives, staff from each department presented their requests last Monday during our budget feedback presentation. So I will just recap the highlights of each request, but we do have staff members present from each department should you have any questions related to these requests. You will see here on the summary the anticipated annual impact for 2025 through 2028 for each of these requests. So you can see that in one space. The first 2 projects are related to the projects that Deputy City Manager Inglis has presented on throughout this past few months, with the first being the retiree health benefit. This is a placeholder for a potential benefit program that a committee made up of staff across city departments has been researching. The goal is to attract and retain employees while also looking to minimize healthcare costs of those ready to retire who may traditionally be held back by a lack of medical coverage prior to becoming Medicare eligible. Staff is looking into actuarial costs to evaluate such a program and will be back before council to get final project approval before spending these funds. But we wanted to set aside an approximated year 1 cost should this program be supported by council at that time once we have the study. So again, this is not a request to approve such a program, only to set aside funds to consider this program next year. Stacy also presented, and council has approved, the addition of a performance-based pay to our performance management system. As mentioned earlier, the annual market adjustments were included in the department's salary and wages lines that we went over in each department. And this request is to set aside funding related to the performance incentives that will be allocated across the departments and trued up at year end when evaluations are submitted and incentives are paid out. This will be kind of similar to how we budget for benefits, as we talked about earlier with healthcare insurance costs. And that year one does include a contingency as we roll up the program and see how it actually is allocated. In municipal court, Milton currently has one full-time deputy court clerk that is a Milton staff member, along with a court clerk and solicitor that are part of the IGA with Alpharetta. This request would be to add a full-time administrative position to the IGA that would be able to back up and support our deputy court clerk on a day-to-day tasks, as well as serve as the backup in her absence for lunch breaks, as well as paid time off. And that would be our share in the 60-40 split. The police department has identified an opportunity to dedicate a Milton officer to the local schools. Currently, there is a Fulton County officer that primarily serves in the middle school and high schools, and this request would be to dedicate our Milton officer to the elementary and private schools, as well as serve as the liaison to that Fulton County officer, thereby strengthening the relationship of the Milton Police Department and the schools throughout this area, with an emphasis on prevention and safety for the students. We'll talk later about capital requests, and this vehicle request will come up under that section. Police have also presented a request to add 2 sergeant positions to their ranks. Currently, 2 squads have 1 dedicated sergeant serving as a supervisor based on a flex program the department utilized in recent years. With coverage requirements and adequate supervisory support needs, PD has determined that the traditional 2 sergeants per squad approach is a better solution for several reasons and has requested the addition of those 2 positions. You can see here again a vehicle request that will come up later, and we have the layout of the current department showing where there is 1 sergeant for Squad A and Squad B, and those would increase to 2 based on approval of this request, showing 2 across all the squads. Police has also requested a tethered unmanned aircraft system, or UAS, that can be flown without the time restrictions that are typical of these types of units, as it will be powered by a generator or a vehicle and can stay operational for longer lengths of time to monitor a scene. This type of system has fewer FAA requirements and will allow for less costly training and the use by more staff than the current system allows for. It would have maintenance cost for video footage and things like that annually that has been included in the 5-year plan. Public Works presented the request for a recycling and solid waste management plan at one of our feedback sessions. This request will fund an outside expert to help update the plan, which was initially adopted in 2009. They will look at options for the city that may include regional partnerships and other opportunities for cost savings while providing services to our community, as that is one of the most frequently requested areas in our surveys. That will have no recurring costs, as it's one-time fee for the outside consultant. Community Development has requested access to a third-party commercial real estate availability software that will allow staff and business owners to look at what spaces are available throughout the city, if they are vacant or when the current lease may be up, the layout of those buildings, and other factors that will help fill commercial spaces. The program they're looking to pilot will cost about $6,500 per year, and if for any reason there's a different cost or we come back with other options, they'll be back before you to discuss that. Oh, before I move on, are there any questions about the new initiatives? All right, we're about a third of the way there. So looking at our special revenue fund, so we're done with our general fund and we're moving on to our special revenue funds. Here we have our special events fund, and we have each of these expenditures broken down by event. You can see increases in the Crabapple Fest requests, and those have been offset by vendor fees or sponsorship anticipations. We have a request in the Christmas in Milton event category to add decorations to the public safety complex on Highway 9 based on council requests to bring some decorations back to that side of town. We have the spring events, which includes an expansion of the eggs available. Last year, we had such a good turnout that we almost ran out of eggs, or maybe even did. So they're looking to expand having enough eggs to keep that event as to address everybody that wants to participate. And there is a request overall of $18,466 from the general fund to support any anticipated expenses that go beyond what the city forecasts to receive in hotel motel tax. Should those revenues come in higher or should expenses come in lower than anticipated, the city will not transfer those funds from the general fund. They'll just stay within the general fund. Then we have our recurring special revenue funds, the confiscated assets fund. Again, once a item that is eligible for spending in this category is identified, we then budget for that item. So we don't project any kind of spending until the department has identified an eligible expense. We have the E911 fund. 100% of what comes in goes straight out to City of Alpharetta through our IGA for our E911 services, including the building and all the dispatchers. The operating grant fund, we currently have an operating grant within the police department, and they are continuing that program. That will be expensed as we incur those expenses. We have the American Rescue Plan Act. We are getting close to nearing the end of this spending. Again, council did approve around $1 million in eligible salary expenditures in fiscal year 2023. And we do have some other stormwater projects as they come up and are spent. We're spending them on those first come, first serve until we deplete those funds. And again, our hotel motel tax fund, we have our one hotel, and as revenues come in from that tax, they go right back out to the special events fund to fund those events throughout the city and throughout the year. Okay. Any questions about special revenues? Excellent. So now we have our 7-year capital improvement plan, or CIP. This includes the capital projects fund, the green space bond fund, the T-SPLOST fund, the capital grant fund, the impact fees fund, and our revenue bond fund. Here we have a listing of all active projects in the CIP, including estimated project costs, funding that have been collected to date, and funding needs over the 7-year plan by funding source. So you can see that across this way. So as you can see, this includes all of the different revenue sources, including our T-SPLOST projects. So Sarah has gone through and created all of the new project sheets, and we're working on finalizing them for all the T-SPLOST 2 projects. She's working on smaller projects now while the comprehensive transportation plan is underway, and that will identify the larger projects that will come out of T-SPLOST 2. And we'll talk about another initiative related to T-SPLOST at the end of this when we talk about our new initiatives. But for this moment, I'd like to just focus in on our PAYGO program. These are the requests that come through that operating transfer out from the general fund. And I'd like to point out that there are some projects that don't really amount to the need to be a new initiative, but they are a change from last year's plan, so I'd like to just highlight those for transparency purposes. The first of these requests we mentioned earlier, and that's Finance's request to research a new ERP, as opposed to funding the add-on modules to support the tasks of the current system can't provide. A few years back, staff looked into this, and there were no applicable long-term solutions on the market at our price point. There have been new solutions introduced to the market since then, and Finance is requesting $101,325 to add to the $61,665 in the account to put out an RFP to determine best next steps for a comprehensive software solution. This would correspond to the reduction of services from some of our third-party add-on programs that we already are accounting for in the general fund, as well as that slight increase for the additional services that this will be able to provide. You can see right below that here, we have information services. In years past, as the need for a new server or switch would come about, we would ask for the funding in that given year, and we would also fund replacements of laptops and PCs through each individual department. As information services is seeking approval for their request to begin setting aside annual funds to ensure that the replacement funding for these are available at the time, you'll see that there is a higher request in these next 2 years as some of those replacements are due immediately, and then it'll kind of pan out to this more consistent annual request, so we'll have those funding available. This is going to be in line historically with how we fund things such as our vehicle replacement reserve and other capital assets. It'll also be in line with the way that accounting now has to account for depreciation on items bought as a bulk of units, as a bundle of units. Before we were able to look at individual unit costs, and now we have to depreciate based on total cost of the purchase, so this will help track those as well. So we've had no changes in the police department's requests, and as we have spoken about at a couple of different occasions, the fire apparatus are coming in higher than we have projected, and we have an increase of about $272,500 annually to set aside funding necessary to replace those apparatus over the next 7 years. In Public Works, we have been able to utilize T-SPOS funds to cover bridge replacement costs in fiscal year 24 through 26, as well as the city match on the grant funding for the Big Creek Greenway that will save $600,000 in PAYGO funding in fiscal year 2024. Based on council feedback for the timing of the implementing of future improvements at Providence Park and the active acres at the Milton City Park and Preserve, staff were able to update the funding plan, reducing $200,000 to fiscal year 2024's final request for these park sites. This plan also includes $1.3 million we set aside towards the indoor community center. Staff will revisit this plan at mid-year 2024 to determine if any additional funds are available to put towards this project. At this time, the 7-year plan anticipates the build out of this project around year 8, so right after this project plan. Those are the material changes to our ongoing capital improvement projects. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to discuss about those before we move on to new initiatives? And included in the packet is an individual project sheet for each project, so if you want to take a look at those, we're happy to answer any questions you may have about an individual project, but we won't go through that detail tonight. So the first of our new initiative requests that we'd like to discuss is a change in the approach for T-SPOS project inspection. And I'm going to back up for a moment to that project sheet. For the past few years, staff has utilized a third-party contract for project inspection and believes there can be significant savings by bringing this position in-house. The plan contemplates covering 100% of these staffing costs through T-SPOS 2 revenues, but this would be an addition of 1 full-time employee to our staffing headcount. Should T-SPOS not be renewed, the position would be reevaluated at the end of T-SPOS 2 to determine needs at that time, and if T-SPOS 3 were to be a reality, this position would remain a T-SPOS funded position to continue the inspection duties for the new projects. A large-scale intersection project could cost upwards of $350,000 to inspect that one intersection. So over the next few years, staff is contemplating around $1.7 million in inspection costs that we could be just spending around $650,000 on if we brought the staff person in-house and shared those duties with our current staff member. As we mentioned before, the vehicles for the position requests are located here in the capital project initiatives. In addition, we have shown here what those anticipated operating fund impacts would look like for fiscal year 2025 through 2028. Public Works has been before you to discuss an asset managed software solution. This asset management software will allow for the city to tie direct costs for different assets of the city to that asset, so we can kind of start determining much better than our Excel spreadsheets if there's something going on with that individual asset, if it needs to be maybe replaced sooner than we normally would have anticipated, or if anything's going on with it. In addition, we'll be able to track depreciation costs directly to the item as opposed to a separate Excel spreadsheet. This does carry an annual around $50,000 projected cost in maintenance contract fees, and as staff identifies the true product, they'll be before you for a contract approval on that. We have the physical security upgrades. The Parks and Recreation Department is working with the Information Services Department to look at upgrading our access-based control as well as the video surveillance at our parks and facilities. This contemplates looking at a citywide solution over the next 2 years and carries only a minimal $2,000 anticipated annual cost for the maintenance and support of those cameras. And finally, the marketing plan for community development. Community development's requesting $45,000. Again, they have been before you in our feedback sessions, looking at a tailored program to market the Highway 9 Deerfield area after the Windward Highway 9 LCI and the placemaking plan are in place. And this would be the money for that specialized consultant to come in and guide staff through what types of businesses would fit in that area. I am happy to answer. I know that was fast, but I'm happy to answer any questions I try to that you might have about our proposed fiscal year 2024 budget. Again, we'll have 2 more public hearings to go over this again in September, and then we'll vote at the end of September for our next year.
Any questions for Bernadette? No, I know, speak on behalf of a lot of members of council, we appreciate getting the budget early. It's always helpful.
I appreciate everyone's feedback this year. This has been a good year to have good feedback.
Thank you. Okay, any public comment?
There is none, sir.
Okay, so we will adjourn our work session and we'll go straight into the special called meeting. Will you give me the thumbs up when you're ready? Otherwise we'll just.
Okay, Mayor,
good?
we're ready.
Okay. I would like to call a special called meeting of the Milton City Council for Monday, August 14th, 2023 to order. The city strongly recommends that you review tonight's agenda carefully, and if you wish to speak on any item on the agenda, then please bring your comment cards to the clerk as soon as possible. While the Milton rules allow a speaker to turn in their comment card up until the clerk calls the agenda item, once the agenda item is called, no more comment cards can be accepted. Will the city clerk please call the roll and make general announcements?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Be happy to call roll for the August 14th, 2023 special called council meeting. I would like to remind those in attendance to please silence all cell phones at this time. Those attending the meeting who would like to make a public comment, you are required to complete a public comment card. Your comment card must be presented before the item is called. Any comment cards received after the item has been called will not be accepted. All speakers, identify yourself with name, address, and organization before beginning your comment. If you are representing an organization, an affidavit is required stating you have the authority to speak on behalf of that organization. Please review tonight's agenda, and if you would like to make a comment, please bring your comment cards to me now. Demonstration of any sort within the chamber is prohibited. Please refrain from any applause, cheering, booing, outburst, or dialogue with any person speaking. Anyone in violation will be asked to leave. As I call roll this evening, please confirm attendance. Mayor Peyton Jamison.
Here.
Councilmember Andrea Veerhoff.
Here.
Councilmember Paul Moore.
Here.
Councilmember Juliet Johnson.
Here.
Councilmember Jan Jacobus.
Here.
And Councilmember Rick Morg.
Here.
And for the record, Councilmember Carol Cookerly is absent. Would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, next is approval of the meeting agenda. Is there a motion to approve the meeting agenda?
Mr. Mayor, make a motion that we approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
All right, I have a motion to approve the agenda. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Okay. Next is general public comment. Do we have a public comment?
No, sir, we don't.
Okay, sounds good. So I will skip that. So there's no consent agenda, reports and presentations, or first presentations. Moving on to public hearing, will the city clerk please sound the item?
Mayor, that item is consideration of an ordinance of the mayor and council of the city of Milton, Georgia, to establish the ad valorem tax rate of the city of Milton for fiscal year 2024 and for other purposes. Agenda item number 23208, our deputy city manager, Ms. Bernadette Harville.
Hey, good evening again. We are here this evening to discuss setting the 2023 millage rate, which will fund the fiscal year 2024 activity we just went over. This is the second of 3 required public hearings, and we will go through the same presentation we went through last Monday evening, so I appreciate everyone bearing with me, just for public transparency purposes and giving anyone an opportunity to have some input. So on our agenda tonight, we have some of the important definitions followed by the state's requirements for the public hearings, as well as the advertisements regarding setting a millage rate. Then we will discuss the millage rate options, and please keep in mind you can approve any millage rate up to the legal cap of 4.731 mils. Staff has currently advertised at our current millage rate of 4.469 mils to allow council the flexibility to select any rate up to that current rate without needing to re-advertise or hold any additional meetings. But you do by law have the ability to approve up to 4.731. We just need to go back and re-advertise and have a few more hearings. Following the millage rate overview, we'll break down the digest by category and show the taxes that would be levied at the current millage rate, the millage rate which supports that 2024 budget we just talked about, as well as the rollback millage rate. And then we'll be followed up by a review of a small general draft budget, but we just went over it more detail, so we'll probably skip through that slide this evening. After that, we will look at some ways property owners can reduce their tax liability. We know that's important as we have a heavy reliance on residential property taxes, how to calculate the tax bill, and then the value of taxpayer dollars in the city of Milton. So again, we have those definitions. A mill is $1 per $1,000 of assessed property values, or you take 0.001 times the assessed value to get your tax liability. The fair market value is an estimate of the market value of your property as determined by the Fulton County Board of Assessors, not any other real estate provider or any other figure. That is just the one provided by Fulton County. The assessed or taxable value is 40% of that fair market value, and our property taxes, again, are calculated by taking that 40% value, reducing by any exemptions you're eligible for, and then multiplying by the millage rate to get your taxes owed. The rollback rate we'll talk about this evening is the previous year's millage rate minus the millage equivalent, which we'll talk about here in a moment, to the total net assessed value added by reassessment. So that's kind of getting the value of the inflation separated out so we can see what that's worth. The millage equivalent is the equation where the reassessment of existing real property is divided by the current year's net digest and then multiplied by the prior year's millage rate to determine what that millage equivalent is. Again, whenever the proposed or advertised, I like to use the word advertise in this case because we're not really proposing anything, we're just giving you your options, rate exceeds the rollback rate, the city must hold 3 public hearings. Milton's calculated maintenance and operating rollback millage rate for 2023 is 4.389 mils. With the advertised millage rate at 4.469 mils, the open meetings required does require those 3 public hearings. We had our first one last Monday with our first presentation, our second one this evening, and our third one will be next Monday, in addition to unfinished business where you all will vote to adopt a millage rate. Here's the example of the ad we put in the paper this year. You can see at 4.469 mils is a projected increase of 0.08 mils over the rollback rate, or 1.82%. When looking at the 5-year history of levy, that takes the actual levy projections in revenues at 100% collections and shows a year-over-year increase of 11.6%. This is where you do include all the new construction and things like that. Again, here is a snip of the digest figures we get from Fulton County, and you can see that our reassessment of real existing property is that segment we pull out to get the rollback rate. And here's the math behind the ads. We won't go through them again, but as we talked about, the millage equivalent is 0.08 mils. Our rollback rate is 4.389 mils, and that percentage tax increase is 1.82% when considering the current millage rate versus the rollback rate. Again, when looking at the 5-year history of levy, this is the math you do to get to that 11.6%. You take the current year's tax levy minus last year's tax levy divided by the prior year levy times 100% to get your percent increase. Here are the 3 millage rate options that staff has prepared. Again, letting you know you could approve anything up to 4.731 mils. Our current millage rate is 4.469. The forecasted 2024 budget most closely aligns with 4.395 mils. I believe there's like a $2,000 difference in the 97% projection in what we have in our budget. And the rollback M&O millage rate of 4.389 mils. We have our separately calculated green space bond millage rate, which is a variable rate that depends upon the debt service we owe in that year and the digest figures that we have. Again, the floating exemption does not apply to this millage rate. So that is, it has been reduced based on the expanded digest at 0.364 mils. For reference, last year's was 0.452 mils and the year before was 0.487 mils. So here we can see the taxes that will be levied under the 3 millage rate options we discussed for real property, personal property, and motor vehicle. For year 1, at 97%, 65%, and 70% collection rates respectively. Motor vehicle was previously closer to 55%. We have seen increased collections compared to the projection, so we've increased that percentage to 70%. The current millage rate would yield anticipated revenues of about 1.6% or $255,955 higher than 4.395 mils, which is the rate that most closely supports, again, that 2024 budget forecast. The difference between 4.395 mils and the rollback rate of 4.389 mils is $20,753 or 0.14%. And the variance between the current 4.469 millage rate and the calculated rollback rate is 1.82% as advertised, or $276,708. Lastly, for your reference, you can see the adopted, amended real property current year budget, as well as the collections as of August 1st. We talked about this earlier this evening, but we did have to reduce revenues in 2023 based on the projection of the floating exemptions, which we have adjusted for 2024. We went over the budget in detail, so I will skip over this right now. And it actually has been updated slightly in your newest projections. Here we'll go over some of the ways that taxpayers in Milton can save money. If the home you live in is your primary residence, the city recognizes several exemptions in order to reduce tax liability for qualifying property owners. There's the basic homestead exemption of $15,000. You can be any age, any income as long as it's your primary residence and qualify for that. Along with that qualification comes qualification of the city's floating homestead exemption, which caps taxable property value growth at 3%, or the CPI, whichever is greater. The City of Milton also offers senior exemptions for those 65 and older. Last year, you all approved and the citizens supported that there will be no income requirement for 65 and older, and they will get $25,000 exemption on both the M&O and bond side. So now all the City of Milton's specific exemptions apply to both the maintenance and operating and bond millage rates. At 70 and older, if you meet the income qualification of $100,000 or less, you have a full value exemption from City of Milton. You do not pay City of Milton taxes. The same thing goes for those with a disability exemption certified by a licensed physician who make around $80,280 in 2022, and we'll get a new rate for that in 2023 coming soon. Again, if you qualify for that, you will have a full value, do not pay any City of Milton taxes. Here we have our floating exemption. Again, that applies to the primary residence and 5 contiguous acres of land. If you do improvements to your home, it does not fall within this exemption. The adjusted base year is multiplied by that CPI value, which has been 3% last year and will be again 3% this year as inflation has exceeded that amount. So that is the cap. This just gives you an example of how that works to show you that any growth in your home value will be shown up as an exemption in the current tax year to not allow your taxable value to grow more than that 3%. All your other exemptions are on top of that. So once you get that calculation, you'll then take, if you have the additional $25,000 senior exemption, $15,000 basic, and all those things come after that. The city also has the Conservation Use Value Assessment, or CUVA program, applicable to our homeowners who have properties under 2,000 acres that qualify under the state's conservation use laws. And this is where the property will be valued at the use rather than the market value. So that is significant savings for some of our larger lot homeowners who have conservation and agricultural type activity on their property. You do have to guarantee that type of activity for a period of 10 years, so it is an investment in the future for that. Always like to point out the tax assessment notices. They go out, you have all received them way earlier than we were even talking about our millage rate. So we ask everyone not to try to use these to produce a tax bill for the current year, but really to just make sure that your home value is trending where you believe it is worth. That will drive all the other information you need for your coming tax bill. Again, the county does not keep City of Milton exemption data by parcel. It doesn't show even the floating homestead exemption for the calculations that they do have. And again, they use our prior year millage rate. So we just ask everyone to take a look at that, but not use that as projecting your bill. If you have any questions about which exemptions you have at City of Milton, please feel free to call the finance department. They will confirm for you. So here is a sample of a fair market value home of $700,000, just using that basic $15,000 exemption and not the floating, just to keep it very easy for math purposes. Showing you again how to calculate a tax bill. You take your for 40% of your fair market value, that's your assessed value. Then you reduce all the exemptions you have. So if you were eligible for others, you would add them into that line, and you come up with your taxable, your subtotal or your taxable value. Then you multiply that times the millage rate. And then you get your total taxes due for the year. So here you can see the difference between 4.469, 4.395, and 4.389 mils. Again, the difference between the two ends is 1.82%. Looking at the value of your tax dollar, we have here just showing the 4.469 advertised millage rate, what that would cost a citizen, an average citizen per day, about $3.24 for all the services that we just provided in the 2024 proposed budget. And again, looking at that across different percentages, you can see 42% approximately going to public safety, 19% towards that PAYGO program, and what that would look like for under each different millage rate. Happy to answer any questions about our millage rate. We'll go through this one more time next Monday.
Any questions for Bernadette? Any public comment?
There's none, sir.
Okay, close the public hearing. And we have no zoning agenda, no unfinished business or new business items. We'll move on to mayor and council reports. I don't have anything to report on. Any council members? No? Okay, so we will move on to executive session to discuss personnel, land acquisition, and potential litigation. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion from Councilmember Moore, and a second from Councilmember Johnson. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Is that
Any
you?
opposed?
Is that you?
Yeah. Are you good, Tammy? She was like, go slow.
Okay, go.
Motion to reconvene.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Wait, who's second?
Lauren Jacobs.
All right, adjourn.
All right, motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Rick and Jean.